Good afternoon. Let's talk about deflection, a major red flag. So, what is it, first of all? Deflection is basically changing the source of an object, action, emotion, or thought. Okay? And so, this is something that both males and females do. And it's actually a coping mechanism. Now, it's deflection is recognized as a strategy in narcissistic abuse scenarios. Okay, where basically blame is shifted, to outside sources or to the partner for the narcissistic individual's behavior. So that's obviously a real problem, right? But it's also, though, a coping mechanism when people don't want to face their bullshit. Whether it's their traumas, their insecurities, or their bad behaviors, or shitty motivations. They want to go through with an action or justify things that they've done. And so what they'll do is they'll deflect the source. So, I mean, an example would be like, well, yeah, I did cheat on him and that was wrong, but he wasn't emotionally supportive. He never listened to me and he was, lazy around the house and blah, blah, right? Whatever, right? So we just shifted the blame to a different source when the real source was she maybe wasn't sexually interested in him anymore, or maybe wasn't in the first place because he was a beta provider and, just found an opportunity to sleep with someone more attractive and just slept with someone more attractive. Like he could have been doing all of the things in the world to prevent that cheating scenario, and she just does it anyway because she found a more attractive guy to sleep with, right? And so it could be any variety of things. Well, yeah, I know I was, yeah, I know you see this in real abusive scenarios. Maybe a guy telling his girl, yeah, he shouldn't have hit her, but she really pushed me, pushed him to that point. When the reality is he's just an abusive guy who has, was going to lay his hands on his girl if things go wrong or go south, and that's just who he is as a person, right? And that's how he executes power and manipulation in that relationship. It had really nothing to do with her. She could have pushed it or not. You know what I'm saying? And so that's deflection, is deflecting the source. I mean, that's actually a great example, is abuse. You'll see women who stay with guys who are physically abusive to them, and they'll deflect for them. They'll say, well, he did that to me, but he really wasn't himself, and he was drunk, or he was this, he was, and I had done things to trigger that, and like we're whatever, when the reality is the dude is just a antisocial personality disorder person with no emotional self-control, and who's going to be apt to punching her in the face the next time, he's a little drunk or a little just not feeling right, or she does the wrong thing. You get what I'm saying? And so, and that's where, and we delude ourselves as human beings all the time. We deflect all the time. How information will pass through the male and female brain? Well, we'll start with the female brain. It kind of works like this. So you have your hindbrain drives, okay? And so those are your primitive drives that sort of drive your behavior, your mating behavior, your mate choices. All right, so a lot of your sexual selection and sexual choices are being driven by that hindbrain, okay? And now that, we call it mammalian brain, reptilian brain, kind of a mixture of the two. Then you have your bucket of experiences. So your conditioned responses based on previous experiences. That's been tabbed as the unconscious mind. But there's nothing woo-woo about that, okay? It's just that you've done a response that looked similar or the same before, and it worked for you. Even if it didn't work well, it allowed you to survive. And so that's the conditioned response that you might be apt to do again. And so when you're about to do a behavior or have a thought or do an action, I mean, this is the process. It's going through hindbrain drive, unconscious mind next, and then the next thing is going to depend on whether you're male or female, usually, okay? And so the next thing, if you're a female, it's going to go through an emotional barrier. Women are good, and women have an emotional barrier that they're going to pass through first, and so they're going to have an emotion about something that is that's going to trigger then the next move, and well, then the next place that it goes is their logical, frontal lobe, your executive brain, right? And so that's kind of how that information very rapidly travels through. And so women are very apt to deflecting because they'll have a feeling about something. And so, and it could be just hindbrain drives and past experiences, driving the behavior that triggers an emotion or a feeling first, and then that emotional or feeling will make them want to do a particular action, and then they'll use their logical brain to justify whatever that action is after the fact. So they're not making a conscious logical decision about their behavior. Let's say and especially if we're talking about bad behavior, like if she's going to nag her man incessantly to death, or create an argument, or create drama, or cheat, or have inappropriate friendships with other men, or steal money, like whatever it is, you know what I mean? Whatever bad choices she's about to make, she'll rationalize it after she's already made that choice with her hindbrain drive, her unconscious, and that emotional brain, right? That emotional part of her. And so that's how that will work. With males are wired for it to hit the logic centers first. So it'll go hindbrain drive, unconscious, and then it hits the logical executive functioning first. So men will usually think about it and try to make a logical decision first, then they'll have an emotion about it later. Now, if there's trauma or hang-ups, or basically past experiences that created trauma, men will have a reaction just like a female. Okay, so they'll respond emotionally first and then logically later. So men are just as apt or susceptible to deflecting because of that emotional response that they'll have first. And deflection can happen even when the logical reasoning is happening first as well. I mean, again, if there's maladaptive thinking, trauma, or just bad behaviors that they don't want to face. They don't want to face the fact that they're going to do a bad behavior because they just want to do that behavior. You know what I mean? You see this all the time. Women will justify, let's say, sleeping with a guy that's not good for them, right? It's just, they're gonna go around about in a circle, and all they want is they want the dude's dick, right? And so they're going to go around and about in a circle to get there so that they can justify getting the dude's dick, even though he's maybe not a good match, or maybe not a good person even, right? But their hindbrain says mate with him, and so they'll justify it all day long and then rationalize later. And then, of course, after they've slept with a guy a bunch of times and the guy turns out to be toxic or terrible, or he ghosts her, or he sleeps with her sister, or whatever, you know what I mean? Then it'll be all the guy's fault, right? Even though they had all the warning signs and everything in front of their face to make a better decision, they won't blame themselves or look at their own decision making as being flawed. They will instead look at this guy as this terrible person, and I thought this and I thought that. It's like, no, you just rationalized because you wanted his dick. And guys do the same thing with women, right? I mean, she's a single mom with, a few sets of kids from different dads, and, financial trouble, bad behavior, all this stuff. But hey, you know what? She gives really good head. And so the guy's going to then rationalize how they're a good match, right? And so that's that rationalization that's a real danger, that you have to not do that yourself, first of all. But then the second thing is that it's a big red flag if you plan on getting a long-term, relationship or dating scenario with somebody. If somebody has as a common practice uses deflection, meaning that their real motivations, they might not even be self-aware enough to see what their real motivations are, right? But they make these decisions based on their true motivations, and then they deflect and give characteristics to those motivations that aren't true, or they blame those behaviors on something else. If you're talking to a female or a male, for example, and they never take responsibility for their past relationship breakups, they don't ever say, yeah, I did a few things wrong too, or whatever, you know what I mean, then that's a pretty good warning sign. When they're telling about conflicts or stories and they're never taking blame for that stuff, that's a warning sign. When they make bad choices and they're giving you the origin story of why they made that choice, but you're listening and you know that that's just bullshit, that's probably not, that doesn't make sense, you know what I mean, that their motivation was probably different than that, that's deflection. And so somebody who does that, at the very least, if they're not, I mean in the most extreme case, they could be narcissistic personality disorder, right? And then that's what they do as a practice for manipulation, is to deflect. But normal people do this too. So they could just be not very self-aware. You know what I mean? They could be just so, there's different levels of solipsism for females, and they could just be, very, very so solipsistic that they just, and they have enough other social proof to be that way, that they just don't, ever want to take personal responsibility or ever want to look at their true motivations for their behaviors. And you see this all the time, and I don't, since I don't date men, and I see it with women I've had in my past, and of course, guys that I coach, I primarily coach males, although I do coach females too, but I'll see it with females a lot. And I'm not saying that guys don't do it, but I see it a lot with females. I mean, very, very, very common, this deflection. Even with relatively healthy females who are not like on the DSM, or they don't have a diagnosis, right, for a psychological problem. I mean, relatively healthy females will use deflection all the time to just justify their own behavior or what have you. And so it's a real issue, and it's kind of one of those things that everybody has done, and there's not a single person on earth that's never done this, where you fool yourself, you know what I mean? You tell yourself a bullshit story so you can go do some shit that's not really, that's maybe short-term rewarding, but long-term not good, right? And so we've all been guilty of that. But you want to be, if somebody is just doing that on a rather consistent basis, and they're just, at the very least, they might not be self-aware, right? They might not have that self-awareness to know what is motivating them and what they're doing. And that's a real problem, especially if you're trying to be in a long-term relationship and make that last, right? I mean, this male or female could kind of do some bad shit to make that relationship end. And if you look at the relationship history, they probably have a history of doing that. Although they'll never tell you it's their fault, they'll always blame the other person. And so they'll do these deflecting techniques. They'll get mad at you and then have an inappropriate relationship with the opposite sex or whatever, and they'll deny and deflect the reasoning for that. They'll become really good friends with Kevin from sales that you don't need to worry about, but they're just good friends, you know what I mean? And having an inappropriate relationship with that person, and then just telling him, no, I'm not attracted to him, we're like brothers, and and then of course, they end up sleeping together at some business trip, whatever, the stuff that does go on, that guy that you don't have to worry about, or that girl you don't have to worry about, you know what I mean? And so they're not self-aware. They believe the bullshit they tell themselves, and they'll go along a path of fucking their relationship up, and they won't even know, they won't even see that they're doing it. It's just their hindbrain driving it, and their rational mind, deflecting and justifying, because they're really not that self-aware. In any case, whether it's malicious or not malicious, that's the reasons that they do it, it's not for you, right? You got to make sure that you're self-aware enough and you do enough work on yourself so you don't bullshit yourself through life. And if you're trying to want a long-term partner that you actually want to be with for a long period of time, you want someone that's going to match you with that, right? You want somebody who's going to be working on their self-awareness too, and not just deflecting their behavior throughout their lives, right? Because if that's what they're doing, I mean, you can game them and do a lot of stuff, but at the end of the day, they don't have it's going to be hard to get behind a set of principles or morals or anything to direct their behavior. They're really just at that point, especially if deflecting is just, if they're really not self-aware and deflection is a huge thing that they do, I mean, they're really just another animal, responding to their hindbrain and justifying it with human logic. And quite frankly, I don't know about you, but if I'm chasing excellence, that means I'm not going to bullshit myself. And I don't want to be with somebody who bullshits themselves either, right? And so when you're dating somebody, male, female, whatever, you're out there, if you find that you're with somebody or you're seeing this person and they have a huge propensity of self-denial, bullshitting themselves and deflecting, then I would say for you to not get in a long-term relationship with that person, and look for somebody who doesn't do that shit, right? So thanks for listening. All right, hopefully that makes sense. I kind of rambled a bit. So anyway, smash the like button, share it. This is actually a really important issue, but a lot of people don't understand how important it is, So share it with your buddies, share it with your girlfriends, your guy friends, your partners. Do you know what I mean? And also take some inventory on yourself so you're not doing these things, right? Again, hit the like button, subscribe. That helps me put out more content. All right. Thanks again for tuning in.